The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Sweet, how many people they get nicer?
Welcome to Rudy's Revelation. Finding revelation in the news and meaning in media. Sunday, January 10th, 2020. Today I'll be talking back to the Sunday Talking Heads on CBS Face the Nation, where Rhino Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri warns the president should be very careful in the last 10 days of his term. I'll also be checking in with Sunday Morning Propaganda and our favorite feel-good feature news program, CBS Sunday Morning, where this week's show was rife with false narrative. We'll concentrate on CBS News national security correspondent David Martin, who talks with former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff about the failure of the Capitol Police to prevent Trump supporters from reaching a joint session of Congress, despite threats of violence posted on social media in the run-up to the Electoral College vote tabulation. Also be tearing into the Sunday New York Times, showing how the newspaper continually mischaracterizes the fact to mislead the public. And of course, I'll be going over the weekend headlines all in the next 30 minutes. But first, I'll be taking you back to school, giving you some historical context to frame this week's news narratives. The word of the day is Agitprop.
Propaganda.
And obviously the reason we talk about propaganda, and especially this week, is because there is and has been a lot of agitprop going on, and most particularly in this week's Capitol incident.
Agitprop, abbreviated from Russian agitatsiya propaganda, agitation propaganda, political strategy in which the techniques of agitation and propaganda are used to influence and mobilize public opinion.
And obviously we saw a lot of that going on, and the key to this week and what happened at the Capitol is looking at the agitprop and how groups like Antifa and BLM use agitprop. They have a photographer with them, they agitate their opponent, and then they record it for propaganda purposes. Now, this is from the website Marxist.org on the role of agitation and propaganda. Communists often talk about the crucial importance of revolutionary agitation and propaganda, and with good reason. Together, the agitation and propaganda are mighty and indispensable weapon in the party's revolutionary arsenal. How else but with vivid, compelling agitation, as well as propaganda, can the hatred which is provoked by daily life under capitalism be further aroused and sharpened against the bourgeoisie? This is from Marxist.org. Now, one of the things I want to point out as agitprop is what happened in the color revolutions in Russia and Eastern Europe. And basically what happened there, we're going to talk about the tactics of agitprop and how it's used. Ukraine's maiden revolution snipers were U.S. assets from Georgia. Now, this is from October 27th, 2019. But here we're going to go to BBC Ukraine Crisis, what we know about the Kiev snipers. Now, if anybody doesn't know about the maiden revolutions, there are a lot of color revolutions in Eastern Europe, and there were two in Ukraine. The latest revolution there wasn't considered a color revolution. But they did have the Orange Revolution in Ukraine that put in that government, and they did it again in Ukraine, but this one wasn't considered a color revolution, but it had all the same hallmarks. And what happened is they used snipers to kill people on both sides to inflame the conflict. And what they did is they shot people with snipers, and they had photographers there to capture the event, and that roiled both sides into conflict. This is from Global Research on Globalism. Another false flag terror admission, snipers into 2014 Kiev Maidan protests. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole background here. It has, if you don't really understand what happened in the Maidan revolutions, it was a revolution. It was fostered by the people, but the people were manipulated by a bunch of different agitprop incidents, including the sniper shooting, which later on we found out was done by different intelligence assets. Snipers at Ukraine's Maidan confessed to shooting both sides, an Italian report ignored by the mainstream media. And this is from November 2017. How much of the current Russophobia campaign is to detract from the outrageous far-right regime Barry Obama installed in Ukraine? Certainly, if this wave of anti-Semitism, Russophobia, was not clouding everything involving that region of the world, Ukraine's chaos would certainly receive more attention. So even protecting the U.S. Democratic Party's domestic standing is probably the primary goal. Another key goal is obfuscating the heinous effort to get NATO installed in Ukraine and to destabilize Russia via Afghanistan. So this guy goes on, this is Ramin Mazari, and he goes on, basically, the consensus is they were mercenary snipers there who were shooting both sides for propaganda purposes. Here's from Winter Watch, telltale patterns seen in color revolutions, and I'm just going to read into this a little bit. The first phase is the confrontation. It takes place relatively peacefully. The authorities are simply concerned about the huge number of people in the city center. Such a mass of people need to eat, sleep, and go to the toilet. There are not enough toilets for all the protesters, and the protest area acquires the smell of human feces and urine. To establish minimum order, the authorities send ordinary and lightly armed police to the scene, but the presence of the law enforcement officials is also used to amplify protest sentiments among the crowd. Suddenly, there was a call for the construction of barricades and the seizure of government buildings. The second phase of the confrontation is more active and involves slugging it out with the authorities. This is when they start to fight the police. By this time, the authorities are simply obliged to respond to what is happening. The city center is paralyzed by barricades, buildings are seized, and there's an obligatory window smashing and looting. Just like we've seen. This, in turn, requires the authorities to employ special forces or riot police. But what can riot police do when there are several 100,000 protesters? Within 2 or 3 days, riot police are falling down from exhaustion and lack of sleep, and also resulting in getting injured. In parallel with the confrontation, other phase is underway. Exhortation. At this time, representatives of the peace-loving world community begin to actively communicate with the president of the country. A qualitative replacement of protesters takes place. Tough, severe, older men familiar with the tactics of street fighting. These are usually not locals, but come from outside. Every effort is made to provoke riot police to violent retaliatory actions. That's the agitprop. But the riot police are not easily provoked. Next, mysteriously, snipers appear on the scene. Snipers, it doesn't mean snipers with a long rifle. It could be anybody there to start agitating. The first mention of mysterious snipers appeared in 1991 in the confrontations of Vilnius, Lithuania at the TV tower. The snipers shot peaceful demonstrators. Vilnius authorities filed charges against the Soviet Army and the CPSU. Several people from the military and party workers were sentenced along. Well, I'm not going to get into the rest of this article. So you get, this is basically how they do agitprop, and this is from RT. I mean, a lot of this is what I'm reading is from the Russian perspective. It could even be considered propaganda. Kiev snipers shooting from building controlled by Maidan forces. This is this sniper incident was filled with false flags. So this is from NBC News. Maidan massacre anniversary. Ukraine remembers bloody day of protests. The dozens or so who lost their lives during the Ukraine's revolution became known as the Heavenly Hundred. It's a propaganda term. Alliterative, of course, and include more than 50 killed 5 years ago Wednesday. This is when you lionize people that are killed, and it inflames the conflict even further. This is from voltairenet.org, anti-Ukrainian propaganda and the mysterious snipers. From other point of view, RT Television Network released a wiretapping of Estonian Foreign Minister Urmas Paet, in which he is heard saying that the mysterious Maiden Square snipers were linked to the pro-European opposition. They were U.S. assets. I think they were Georgian, but they were U.S.-controlled assets. Without taking a personal position, the Liberal minister phoned the High Representative of the European Union, Lady Catherine Ashton, to share his perplexity. The authenticity of the leaked call, dating from 1 week ago, was confirmed by both parties. I'm not going to get into this whole article either, but I just wanted to demonstrate that there's a lot of press. And this from Modern Diplomacy, how and why the U.S. government perpetuated the 2014 coup in Ukraine. This will document the new Cold War between the U.S. and Russia did not start, as the Western myths has it, with Russia's involvement in the breakaway of Crimea and Donbass from Ukraine, after Ukraine, next door to Russia, had certainly turned rabidly hostile toward Russia in February 2014. Ukraine's replacing its democratically elected neutralist government in February 2014 by a rabidly anti-Russian government was a violent event which produced many corpses. So there is some history here. The key is the snipers, and what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the Agitprop. Because you're going to need this information when we explore this week's narratives. The real Ukrainian snipers massacre to 20th of February 2014, and it goes on and on and on.
Less than 3% of you people read books.
The reading recommendation of this week is Agitprop in America. Agitprop in America was a kind of throwback to the older communist text. I mean, this is neither a strictly positive nor strictly negative sense, but an understanding and appreciation of the overall intellectual trajectory of the book will demand that this is acknowledged. In the absence of biographical details, I would estimate McElroy to be in his 80s. The book opens with a contention that since the 1960s, Marxists and their sympathizers in America have been using agitprop, an integration of intense agitation and propaganda invented by Lenin to destroy America's culture and build cultural Marxism. To this, agitprop has changed American speech and manipulated cultural values and beliefs. American history has been rewritten to make it a Marxian tale of unmitigated oppression. American contemporary society has been reinterpreted as a story of one biologically defined ruling class, straight white males, victimizing all other biologically defined classes. Agitprop in America, it's published this year, or 2020, last year, and is a book by John Harmon McElroy. So we're going to move right on to the news, and because we're running short on time, we got so much to cover. Total submission with mass arrest. China neutralizes Hong Kong democracy movement, and this is from the Washington Post. Video shows DC cop helping Capitol rioters and posing with selfies. Everybody's got to understand is the Democrats are trying to pin this. Everybody knows that this was a stand down. And the Democrats are saying that the Trump supporters were doing it. And it is very clear that the Democrats and the Rhino Republicans wanted the incursion to happen. This is from CNBC. Army Secretary says intel before Capitol riots was all over the board. The 6,200 National Guard go to D.C. From the Gateway Pundit, FBI claims jurisdiction and yesterday took control of shredded ballots being analyzed in Georgia and sends them back to the shredder. Again from the Daily Mail, FBI releases new wanted poster of 10 more MAGA mob rioters they're hunting following the arrests of more than 80 others as Justice Department says there's no evidence Antifa was involved in the Capitol siege. We know Antifa was involved. And all you have to do is take a look here at these are the MAGA people they're looking for. They're all regular Trump supporters that entered the Capitol. Well, this guy might be Antifa. But the people, I didn't see any pictures of the people breaking down the doors, breaking the windows. Where are those people? Where are the people that are fighting with the police outside? I don't see any pictures of them. These are just trespassers. Again, from the Gateway Pundit, breaking: Apple suspends Parler from App Store, citing threats of violence on the platform. Here comes the censorship, folks. This is from Media Matters. Amazon kicks Parler off their web hosting service. Platform expected to go offline Sunday, 1 minute before midnight. From the Wall Street Journal, in Trump's final days, lines are drawn for Republican civil war. That's what's happening. It's going to be first on the Republican side, and the old school Republicans are going to lose. Again, from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Stock Exchange scraps plans to delist Chinese telecom stocks. Shares of China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Telecom climb in Hong Kong. That's because Joe Biden has taken office, and they're soft on China. Obviously, soft on China. They're in China's pocket. But I usually don't go to the Daily Beast, but I just wanted to show this. Conspiracy Netflix doc: CIA flooded black communities with crack. We know that story. And thanks to, you know, Gary Webb and the Dark Alliances. Venezuela opposition, again from the Wall Street Journal, Venezuela opposition debilitated as Biden set to take office. Again, he's soft on communism. From the Gateway Pundit, directions to D.C. in advance of massive Trump Stop the Steal rally are suddenly not available on Apple Maps. It's from NBC New York. Columbia University vice president accused of sex acts with child under 13 at his home. From the New York Times, Simon & Schuster cancels plans for Senator Hawley's book. The publisher faced calls to drop the Missouri Republican's upcoming book, The Tyranny of Big Tech, following criticism of his efforts to overturn the presidential election. Overturn. We just have some simple questions about possible fraud. Can we just look at it as a country? This is from CBS 21. IRS sends stimulus payments to wrong bank accounts, affecting estimated 13 million tax service customers. For millions of Americans who are used online taxes service, their second stimulus payment may have been sent to the wrong bank account. I wonder whose bank account it was sent to. Vaccine rollout hits snag as healthcare workers balk at shots. This is from the Associated Press. And of course, the big news from the Epoch Times: Twitter permanently removes Trump's account from its platform, also removes Trump campaign's account. Twitter has permanently removed President Donald Trump's account from its social media platform, saying his recent Twitter posts were in violation of the glorification of violence policy. Well, we know why. We know why they took him off. Turn into the New York Times. In pulling Trump's megaphone, Twitter shows where the power lies. The ability of a handful of people to control our public discourse has never been more obvious. And that's from the New York Times. Is graphic design the CIA's passion? The agency's website rebrand has sparked chatter about its visual reference points and whether the new look is good. Is that it? All black? Of course. Satan. Can Twitter legally bar Trump? The First Amendment says yes. There are reasons to question the wisdom of recent actions by Twitter in barring President Trump from its site, and Simon & Schuster in canceling the publication of Senator Josh Hawley's book, but the First Amendment is on their side. Not really. We know the spirit of the amendment. Legally, I guess if it's a private company can do whatever it wants to do, but it's the timing and it's the target, and it's in concert or in conspiracy with other companies. Trump's legacy, voters who reject democracy and any politics but their own, the mob attack on the Capitol, and interviews with Trump voters this week show that the president's subversion of democratic values will have an enduring influence with the Republican Party. So this is guy Trip Gabriel who goes off on the sight of a violent mob inspired by President Trump smashing its way into the Capitol was more than just a shocking spectacle. It also highlighted one of the most dangerous parts of Mr. Trump's legacy, the disbelief in democracy that has metastasized among his supporters. We love democracy. We believe in democracy, but if you lost or you're losing, then you lose. You don't cheat to win, and that's exactly what happened. If people don't know, in the 2016 election, they padded the vote by 10,000 or plus votes. It wasn't enough, and Hillary lost. You can look at the Jill Stein recount, and they found, in the paper ballots, of course, that Trump was up over 10,000 votes in each state, so they stopped the recount. This was similar, and that's why they had to stop the voting, because he was overwhelming. So don't tell me, this is what I'm talking about. Am I speculating about the 2020 election? Perhaps. But in 2016, the recount, Jill Stein's recount showed that Trump originally, in the original count, was screwed over by 10,000 or more votes. How did that happen? And one of those places were Michigan. And remember the one county in Michigan that mysteriously flipped 6,000 votes because of a glitch? Let's go back to the Jill Stein recount in 2016. It was 10,000. Was that a glitch? A Hong Kong website gets blocked, raising censorship fears. Users of major mobile carriers can no longer access a service that had detailed the personal information on police officers, a possible sign that the city is turning to tactics used in mainland China. Mainland China has taken over Hong Kong. That's obvious. Without a fight, without even an objection, barely. That's a shame. And just quickly, false reports of the new U.S. variant came from the White House task force. Reports of a highly contagious new variant published on Friday by multiple news outlets was based on speculative statements made by Dr. Deborah Birx. What, is someone going to look at a microscope and see if it's a different variant? I mean, imagine there is. I mean, viruses mutate all the time. I mean, it's just, I'm wondering why they even point out this story. And of course, we end up in the Sunday Review, which is the op-ed section of the Sunday New York Times. And there's some doozies in here. I didn't know which one to pick. Why we need a second Great Migration. I don't know. But what I did settle on here was how to ensure this never happens again. The election and its aftermath have revealed weaknesses in our democracy. Here's how we can fix some of them. And I wanted to go down to the bold points here. This is what's coming up in the next political term. Fix the electoral college process. Establish national best practices for voting and election security, which means just trust tabulation. And don't look at paper ballots. Register voters automatically, so you could just, doesn't matter who it is, they could just be registered. Register everybody. I mean, turn D.C. and Puerto Rico into states, and gerrymandering, which was one of the only ways the Republicans could battle. I mean, both parties gerrymandered, but how the Republicans could battle the influx of immigrants and so forth, the changing of the demographic, which what the Democrats do is they change the demographic. They send more Democrat-likely voters to urban areas within the cities. Make people vote. Now, this is a right-wing crazy. Make people vote. They have this mandatory voting, and I think they have it in Australia. It's crazy. It's certainly not American. Shorten the transition so you don't have time, obviously, to put up a defense to any election that may be contested. And, of course, save the best for last, eliminate the Electoral College. That's beautiful, man. That is just beautiful. Thank you, New York Times, and Beverly Gage, who is a professor at the History of American Studies at Yale, and Emily Bazelon is a staff writer at the New York Times. So let's go off to the talking heads. And we're going to start off with Roy Blunt, the Rhino senator from Missouri, who turns his back on Trump and who should be thrown out of the party.
Nancy Pelosi just said, and as Jim Clyburn said earlier today, this is more of a long-term punishment of the president than trying to remove him from office.
Some of those officers appearing to remove barriers for rioters to allow them in their...
Some of those officers appearing to remove barriers for rioters to allow them in their...
Nancy Pelosi just said, and as Jim Clyburn said earlier today, this is more of a long-term punishment of the president than trying to remove him from office.
This is more of a long-term punishment of the president.
Is there any indication of involvement or complicity from members of the Capitol Police?
Now, Senator Klobuchar and I have announced we're going to look into this, both the planning and whether this support was imminent. You can do anything with looking at film, not knowing what you're talking about. I deeply resent any suggestion that these officers didn't do everything they could do.
Liz Cheney, including Mitt Romney, who called this an insurrection and said that the president was directly involved.
The president should be very careful over the next 10 days that the president touched the hot stove on Wednesday and is unlikely to touch it again. The day Senator Hawley announced he'd be contesting those electoral votes, announced that I would not be.
Your fellow Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was on the other side of that. Do you think that he was complicit, along with the 5 other senators who continued to propagate this lie?
When Senator Cruz said he had a plan to put back in place a commission like the one formed in 1877, I said that wouldn't happen. The impeachment of the president to remove him from office clearly is not going to happen. Nancy Pelosi just said, and as Jim Clyburn said earlier today, this is more of a long-term punishment of the president.
This is more of a long-term punishment of the president.
Yes.
So, and then we're going to leave you with Sunday Morning Propaganda, where David Martin talked with former Secretary of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff.
How could a mob successfully attack the United States Capitol in the first place? What explains such a security failure?
A scene as once unthinkable as airplanes crashing into buildings.
They could have blown the building up.
The barriers erected and manned by the Capitol Police were little more than speed bumps.
They had these pathetic little barricades up beforehand, and what they should have done is had much more robust capabilities well in advance of the 6th of January.
Michael Chertoff, head of Homeland Security during the George W. Bush administration, says the Capitol Police bear primary responsibility. But simple dereliction doesn't explain this statement by D.C. Police Chief Robert Conti.
There was no intelligence that suggested there would be a breach of the U.S. Capitol.
In fact, social media was full of storm the Capitol rhetoric, including a tweet from President Trump predicting it will be wild.
The hoaxes and the lies.
This was not a failure to connect the dots. but a failure to believe the dots.
Trump supporters, they weren't going to be a problem. Trump supporters, they weren't going to be a problem. Trump supporters, they weren't going to be a problem. Or even some, political spin for some of the people in the Capitol Police.
Democratic Congressman James Clyburn offered a more sinister explanation.
Somebody on the inside of those buildings were complicit in this.
The president is vowing we will not be silenced.
Buckle up. I'm afraid we're going to see some very scary activity over the next weeks and months.
What explains such a security failure?
See you next week. Rudy's Revelation. Check us out. Facebook, Twitter.